Hi again, Stephen D. Today I want to talk about two words that came up in Hillary Clinton's acceptance speech. Apparently, and I didn't watch the speech, I didn't watch much of the convention at all, but apparently in her speech she made this following statement: that America is great because it is good. Well, that's a nice sentiment. It's a reference to a famous quote by Alexis de Tocqueville. But America has been great at times, but it has never been consistently good for any period of time. In fact, like most countries, most nation states, it has a lot of bad things on its list. Now, what we are good at, and what we've been good at since the beginning of the founding of this nation, is good rhetoric about how good we are and the good things we stand for, and the goodness of what we strive to be. But in fact, America's greatness is built on two horrific tragedies, two horrific atrocities. The first atrocity was the genocide of the Native American people who were living here before European colonists arrived. Today, we would call it ethnic cleansing. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like the Holocaust. But millions, and we're not even sure how many millions, of Native Americans died so that white people could come from Europe, invade this continent, and steal it away from the people who were living their lives here. The other atrocity, of course, is the bondage in which so many African Americans were held. The original sin of slavery, as it's been called. This was what our greatness was built upon. We spread across an entire continent. Manifest destiny. What is that? It's nothing more than the incredible and arrogant and horrific desire to take that which does not belong to you and justify it through some belief in a higher power, some providential what? That we are the city on a hill, that God gave us this land? No. It's an excuse for what happened to all those people we killed. As for slavery, what can you say? Our nation's economy in its early years was entirely dependent on slave labor. It was the reason we had, the principal reason we had that great Civil War. People tend to think that, oh, well, we went to war to free the slaves. It's not true. Lincoln never wanted that war. What he wanted to do was simply to prevent slavery from spreading further and competing with white labor. He wanted to limit it with the hope that eventually it would die off on its own. But he was never, at least initially, a person who had any good, or sympathy necessarily for African Americans who were held in slavery. He just wanted, as a political means, he wanted to prevent it from, destroying, in his view, and the view of many other Republicans of his faction, the economic possibilities for all the white people who were born here or who immigrated here, whose ancestors immigrated here. The abolitionists were true, a part of the faction of the Republican Party, and they did intend good, but they did not control the entire Republican Party. As anybody who's read much about the Civil War, particularly about Lincoln's presidency, would know. And what happened after that war? A war that, in the end, we said was about creating greater freedom and equality. Well, some good came out of it, but then it was immediately wiped off the map when, in 1876, a deal was struck in which a Democratic nominee for the presidency, who had in all likelihood Republican nominee for the presidency, in all likelihood lost both the electoral and the popular vote, made a deal with the Democrats that Reconstruction would be over, and that all the African Americans who were living there could now be dominated by a vengeful, bigoted, and prejudiced, racist white society, because they were just as racist and bigoted in the North. And for that Republican president to hold on to power, he needed to cut a deal. And so a deal was cut. And then those African Americans were put essentially back into slavery. Conditions as often as horrific as slavery for decades more. The Jim Crow era, the era of lynchings, the era of terror of African American populations, the oppression of an entire people simply because we had to have somebody who we could scapegoat, somebody who the rich could justify to the poor whites as the reason why we can't have good things. And we didn't have good things. You go back to the Gilded Age. In America, and it was great. We had great corporate masters, great barons of industry, and we had children working in factories. We had women locked into factories. We had people in debt to the very companies they worked for, because they weren't even paid in real money, they were paid in company script. Where do you think that famous song came from? That same famous saying, I owe my soul to the company's store. Well, it's based on reality. It's based on what really happened. So for all the highfalutin rhetoric about how good America is, and that our greatness is based on that goodness, it's simply not true. We got into World War I in part because Woodrow Wilson lied to the American people that he would keep us out of war. In fact, he wanted us in the war. He wanted to have greater influence. He wanted America to enter the stage of international politics, because we'd already achieve greatness on this continent. He wanted to achieve more greatness. He wanted to expand into an American empire. And to do that, he had to become a great figure. To become a great figure, he had to bring us, our people, into a war that, we had no real reason to be in. And then afterwards, we promised all those soldiers, well, we'll pay you bonuses, in the future for your service. All those who died and suffered, and all those who lived and suffered. And yet, during the Great Depression, what happened? When the Bonus Army marched to Washington, President Hoover, a supposedly good and great humanitarian, who was then their president, ordered General MacArthur to ride on his cavalry and bring his tanks and his machine guns and his troops and clean out America's veterans from their shanties and tent camps in Washington, D.C. Yeah, we were great, all right, but we did a lot of awful, terrible things to people. And the few times we've been good, we've been fortunate, extremely fortunate. Most of the time in American history, even though we've achieved greatness, and there's a difference between greatness and goodness, trust me, we have not done good things. I'm going to throw a number at you. World War II was the good war. The war we dropped the bombs on Japan. Bombs that killed people from the country where my wife's parents came from. Not to mention the firebombing of Tokyo. But that was the good war, so we're not going to count that one. But in all of the wars that we fought in or have been responsible for or have helped bring about or supported one side or another post World War II, the best estimate, and this is just an estimate, it could be much higher, 20 million people around the world have died as a result of America being involved with our armed forces or through the CIA or by other means to support the murder and death and wars around the world that helped and supported the wealthiest among us, the corporations. As Smedley Butler said, a general from the early 20th century, Marine general who was asked to become a figurehead in a purported coup against FDR, said war is a racket. And he was right, because the Marines had been sent numerous times to Central America. We've intervened so many times in South America and Central America. And what have we done? Did we do that to further the interests of the people who live in there? Of course not. Of course not. We did that for our own interests. We supported dictators, despots, death squads. What was Iran-Contra all about? Iran-Contra, where another country where we had was responsible for a coup that led to the rise of a dictator, the Shah of Iran. We were literally, at that time, of course, Iran was our enemy. During Reagan's era, we were literally taking selling, weapons and parts through intermediaries to Iran in order to earn money to funnel to death squads in El Salvador and in Nicaragua. Think about that. We were financing people who went around whose sole purpose was simply to shoot and kill innocent people, men, women, children, whose only crime was that they were oftentimes just in the wrong place, or they were the wrong sort of people, poor people for the most part. So, yes, we've occasionally done some good things in the United States. And occasionally a great man has come along and has helped bring about good things. And the person I'm thinking of right now, probably, in my opinion, the greatest American who achieved the most good in this country was Martin Luther King Jr. A man of peace, a man of nonviolence, not a man of war. A man who spoke out against not just racial injustice, but economic injustice, against war for the purposes of, profits by the defense industry and profits by other corporations and other interests. And what happened to him? Well, we know what happened to him. The FBI surveilled him, kept a dossier on him. Eventually he was assassinated by, surprise, a white man after he'd been criticized and ridiculed and called a communist and a traitor once he came out against the war in Vietnam. So, former Secretary Hillary Clinton, and God, why did that ever happen? You were wrong. America is not great because it's good. It's great because we have the largest military on the planet. It's great because our financial institutions and our government controls the financial, the global financial institutions around the world that keep us in power economically, despite the fact that most of these corporations now are selling ordinary Americans down the river. They're taking our money, they're finding new ways to squeeze profits off of us. Disaster capitalism. It's not just a metaphor, it's a reality. And our American politicians, the very same people who stood up on that stage at the DNC and said America is good and America is great because it's good, are the ones who took money from those disaster capitalists who are destroying the lives of so many of us and who are responsible for the deaths and destruction and the ruination of lives of countless of millions of others around the world. So, can America be a force for good? Yes, it can be. But for the most part, it's not great because it's good. We are not a great nation because we've been good. We've rarely lived up to our standards, and in fact we have fallen very far from those principles that were announced and enunciated in Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and in famous speeches like the Gettysburg Address and Lincoln's second inaugural address. We've fallen a long way in our time. And if we want to be good, we're going to have to get rid of the system that right now controls our government. And that's people who are basically amoral. People who care more about how much money they're making. People who are obsessed with wealth or power. When you're obsessed with wealth or power, you're not good. You're not doing good. You cannot do good. You can maybe do great things, but great does not mean good. Just remember that. If you want to be good, we need to totally change our political system and our society. So we need to stop fooling ourselves. We need to stop telling ourselves about this lie that, America is the land of the free and the home of the brave, and at the heart of our very national soul is goodness and justice, because it's not true. Open your eyes, people. Wake up if you haven't woken up before. If you truly want this country to be good and not just great, if you want a country in which the chanting of USA isn't just patriotic blather and seen by other countries as a chant of horror, because they know we have the power to kill them if we wish. If you want that chant to mean something, if you want it to mean, yes, we are good and we are doing good in this world, then get out there and do something more than vote for Hillary or vote for Donald Trump. Because it's going to take a lot more than voting for our current two-party system if you want to have a good country, and not just a great one. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for listening. Stephen D. signing off. Take care.